if you have just joined us there, I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for about the next half hour, where we're looking at the Memorise and Recall options in Sage 50 accounts. So remember, keep your questions coming. We'll try and pick up as many of those as we can. Right, this is what we're going to be covering in this session today. So a little bit of background to Memorise and Recall. It's a feature that's been around for a long time, not available in all levels of the software, and some you'll have access to some options but not others. So I'll explain that as we get started. We'll then run through a series of demonstrations looking at batch transactions, journals, invoices and credits, quotations and orders. Now, invoices, credits, quotations and orders, pretty much the same, so we'll just demonstrate that one within the invoices area. So 3 key sort of demos to run through with you today. And hopefully you'll start spotting opportunities where you can use this to automate your tasks a little bit going forward. Once we finish those demonstrations, we'll just try and answer as many questions as we can. I'll explain more about the webinars that we've got coming as well, so you can get yourself registered. Remember, the links that you need to register are included on your follow-up email. You'll get that round about an hour after we finish today. So as I mentioned, if you were here at the very beginning when I first logged on, supporting information for the webinar today, it's available from our help center. Really easy to find if you're on version 29, wherever you are in the software. You'll have a help option in the top right-hand corner, but otherwise just open your browser, go to sage.co.uk/help, and then it'll just prompt you to choose your product. So if you choose Sage 50 accounts, and then you'll be able to search for whatever help you need. Right, so let's get started. So a little bit of background, first of all, where you might use Memorise and Recall. And really, the idea is it's going to help you to automate those tasks. So you would use it when you've got these regular and repetitive entries. So where you want to save that information, you think, I can use that again. So you enter the information once, you essentially save a copy of those details so that in the future, rather than keying in journals or a batch of entries again, then you can just recall that information, make any amends, and add to it if needed, and then save that information. And it can be a big time saver in certain areas. So the areas that we're going to look at with you today: batch entries, journals, and also invoices and credits. Now I've got sales orders and purchase orders on a different line because that's an option that's only available in the professional level. But as you'll see on that table there that I've got, the Memorise and Recall options aren't available at all if you're on the Essentials level of the software. But again, you never know. If you are on Essentials, it might be another feature you think, right, that's another option that we gain by upgrading. On the standard level of Sage 50 accounts, you have this option available within invoices and credits, and quotations for that matter applies in the same area. And on professional, you will have it throughout the software in the various areas that we're about to cover. So without further ado, I'll share my screen and we'll start running through some demonstrations. Actually, there is another area that I haven't mentioned there, and that's in the products area. So if anyone uses the stock take option within products, then you also have Memorise and Recall within there. I don't think it's well used, that one, but it is available to you. Right, okay, so across to my desktop and we'll get stuck into some demos. Right, so I'm in version 29 today. I am on the professional level. I'll remind you again as we go through the options about availability and who will have access to it and who hasn't. If you're not sure about your level of the software, if you just go into help and about within your software, and in the middle section, there's an option that says variant. It's towards the top. It'll say a variant, so it'll either say you're on Sage 50 Cloud Accounts Essentials, just Sage 50 Cloud Accounts, which will be the standard level, or Sage 50 Cloud Professional. So that's how you would know. And sometimes it will say, depending on your level as well, what you're on at the top. So just on this very title bar at the top, so you can see I'm on the professional level. Right, let's start with batch transactions though. So when we're talking about Memorise and Recall, if I just pop into customers as an example, and we'll choose batch invoice. And when we're talking about Memorise and Recall, it's these options here at the top. So Memorise to save it, Recall to bring it back in, and use it basically. So it's available in a number of different areas. So you've got it in batch customer invoices. You've got it, you'll have it again within batch credits. You've got the memorize and recall options here on your toolbar. Now it's an option that can't be hidden by access rights. So if you can't see it in a certain area, it means that your level of the software doesn't have access to that. It doesn't include that option. Now, just as with batch invoices for customers and batch credits for customers, it's also available on supplier for supplier batch invoices and credits. But probably the most common use for this area, as far as batch transactions is concerned, is within the bank accounts area. Now, some people will use this for the likes of things like entering their direct debits into the software. Now, there's a few different ways that you can enter direct debits into the software. But if we pop into bank accounts and then choose the bank payments option, you'll see we've got memorize and recall at the top here. So this particular option, batch transactions, you memorize and recall, it's only available on the professional level of the software. Now, where you would use this, I think probably things like entering direct debits, or maybe if things like where you would have a great big list of payments. So things like if you enter salary information and you show, let's say, a breakdown of those payments by department or by employee, you might enter that information as loads of different lines. You might group it together as one transaction, but rather than you having to key that in each and every time, you key it in once and then you memorize it. So just as a brief example, if I just, let's type salary as the reference, nominal code, we'll do it against, let's say net wages. So we'll do one in the 2000 range. So net wages. And what I might do is I might break my salaries down between different departments, for instance. So let's just say that's department 1. Oh, galleries, we'll change that one. And then we might put an amount in at this time, we might not. Now I'll just put 1,000 in and I'll say it's T9, which normally a salary payment would be. Don't want it to be picked up on our VAT return. And then what I'll do is I'll just almost copy that information a few different times. Just pause that message as well. And what I'll do is I'll just choose different departments. And we'll say that was 2,000 for that one. Just F6 again to copy the information. We'll do 3 lines. And we'll put that one T9 as well. And that's it. Now, ordinarily, if I was just keying that in, I would save that. Now, at this stage, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize it. Rather than me keying this each time, and bear in mind that payment, I'll just change that department to department 3. Bear in mind that set of payments, that could be massive. I could do one for each department. I might do it by employee, and I might list those separately even. So I might have a line for each of my employees. So that could be massive, that payment detail. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize this one, and it'll save it into into the data directory. So on the same path as where my data is held. So if you are in a network, that's where it's going to save it. In this case, it's going to save it into this folder. So I'll pop in I'll just put my initials in, and I'll put BP for bank payments. That's what I'm going to call it, and I'll save it. Now, let's say I come next month. I'll just discard this information for the time being. So let's say I come next month and I want to enter the same information, but I want to make some changes. What I can do is I can click recall, find the file, or the template in this case. So in this case, it's an SGT file. I select it, click open, and it loads that information. Now I can make whatever amends I want at that point. I can change dates, I can add lines, I can remove lines, I can make any amend I want. And then all I would do is I would save it. I can obviously change the values as well if I needed to. Elizabeth, you mentioned there, could you save this into a folder you designate? So let's just do that. I'll put another one in. Doesn't really matter what nominal code or anything I specify at this point. And we'll choose Memorise. So yes, in this case, it would let me, if I wanted to save that to my desktop, for instance. So if you didn't want your colleagues to have access to that, and it's just something that you use, so maybe you want to look that bit better than them, you think I can enter the payments much quicker than you can, you could use this as a bit of a gain, I suppose you would call it. So we'll save that. Obviously, when I go back to, if I just clear that, recall, and it would just be a case of me going back to find that file. So browsing for that one, choosing the relevant one, clicking open, and it will load that information. Again, I can make whatever amends I need. So you mentioned there things like if you were going to use it for month-end runs or supplier payments. Supplier payments doesn't include the Memorise and recall option. It's not classed as a batch entry option, a supplier payment or a customer receipt, so you wouldn't have that one available to you. But things like your batch invoices, batch credits, and also payments. So things like processing, if you've got a big list of direct debits or just standard payments like your expenses that you would record each month, it might be a good way of doing that. Now, there are other alternatives as well, obviously recurring items, which we'll be covering tomorrow morning in a separate webinar. So also potentially you could pop that on a spreadsheet and import that information, again, to save you time. So again, we're just looking at options to hopefully save you time. So this is a nice, easy option for you should you want to go down that route. So nice and easy to use. And of course, if I recall that information, I can make amends. And let's say I want to make changes to it for future periods, I can then just memorize that folder again to save the sort of list of payments, as it were. Now you still need to remember, so let's say I was recalling that one that we looked at earlier, and I make my changes, whatever I want that to be. So let's say this month that one was £1,500. I would amend the dates, etc. You still need to remember to save it. Memorizing it just takes a copy of this information. It doesn't save the transactions. You've still got to remember to click save at the bottom for your transactions themselves. Right, so that's the first option I wanted to cover with you today. So again, that's an option that's only available in the professional level of the software. Another area where Memorise and Recall is available is within nominal codes. Now, this is where it was available originally, Memorise and Recall, and obviously over the years, over the various versions, it's been added into other different areas of the software as more and more people have requested it. So journals was the original option. So I've gone to nominal codes and journal entry, and again, you can see I've got the Memorise and Recall. Now, if I go into Recall, you'll see, and you should have this as well, if you are on the professional level, you'll see there's already some templates available for you. Now, Elizabeth, this is a little bit different, this one, in that you can't save it to the folder that you designate for journals. It will be saved into a default folder for you. So you can't override it on this one. The batch data entry, yes, you can, but journals, you can't. So some of them are on here. Again, these are journals that you're probably not going to post regularly, but things like an opening stock journal. If we scroll down, you'll see some of the others as well. And if you think about journals, think about the journals that you do post. Some of them can be really lengthy. So there might be a series of journals that you post as part of your month-end process, going back to Adele's query about linking in with things that you do on a monthly basis, etc. And Elizabeth mentioned that as well. So journals, obviously, you don't want to be going down each time. And if you think about salary journals, it's not unheard of for salary journals to be 50 lines plus. So you don't want to have to select that nominal code each and every time. So let's see, I've got one here. I've got a monthly salary journal, just as an example. I'll just load it to save myself a little bit of time. So let's say I'd keyed in this manually, this journal, and I think, right, well, I key in the same things each month, but actually the values do change. Then you would just pop in pop in the sort of the structure of your journal, and then you would click Memorise, give it a file name. So I'll just put my initials in, and I'll call it Sal. And I'm just going to save that as well. So I might have different variations of that as well. So you might have a separate journal for monthly payroll, a separate journal that you post, which has probably got potentially a different structure if you did like weekly payroll, for instance. But there's not that many journals that you'll necessarily need to post these days. There's a lot of options in the software which will do the journals for you. So things like the VAT transfer wizard, for instance, when you do the VAT return. But the idea with this, if I just clear that again, is that let's say I come to do the salaries at the end of, let's say at the end of this month. So let's say I come to the end of November and I want to do the salaries. I can just click recall, find the relevant template. Now, where did I save it? Did I save that right? Can't see it for looking here. Oh, there it is. So give it a good file name so you can see it. That would help. So I can see it on the list there. So select your template and then load it. And again, I've got the structure there. All I would need to do is really fill in the values. Make sure the date's right as well, of course. But fill in the values. If there's any that have, let's say SSP reclaimed, for instance, let's say there's nothing to post against that one in the month, then I can use the normal sort of function keys to remove a line or insert a line. I can make whatever changes I want at that point before I actually save it. Now, it does mean as well, if you can set these up in advance, so a bit like myself, where I've got no values, I might set up the structure and think, well, that's the structure for my journal. I'll go in, set it up, and I'll memorize it. So when the time comes, I can recall that, make any changes, fill in the values, and then all I would do is at the bottom, I would just click save at that point. IAD, you mentioned there about if it's a lengthy journal, especially if it is very long, you would probably find it easier to use an import file. Yeah, absolutely. This is an alternative to that without having to use import files. In this instance, it's loading it directly into Sage. Some people aren't as confident possibly as yourself, where you would work in Excel and then import that information. But yeah, importing, as I mentioned earlier, for other areas, it is a good alternative to using this as well. But I think this option within the journals has been around a lot longer than the import option for journals. Anyway, that's, again, it's a very common one, that one, and can be a really good time saver as well. Now, one thing with journals is, I must mention this one, is there is an option when you go into settings, company preferences. So settings, company preferences, just ask me for my password again, and then into parameters, and it's this option here, copy skeleton journal values. So fourth option down, copy skeleton journal values. What that's doing is it will be ticked by default. But if you want it to load your journal, so when you're going to recall, select your journal and say, right, yeah, load that structure, do I want it to include the values that were saved when that journal was memorized? Or do I want all the values to be 0? Now, some people like the journals, like the values to be included, so that they just to almost like remind them whether it's a debit or a credit against a particular nominal code. So that's that option there, that copy skeleton journal values. So if it's ticked, when you load your journal, if there were any values included in the memorized file, it will include that. If not, it will just leave in that case, it would leave the debit and credit value blank if there's no tick in this field. So it depends which way you prefer. So a nice, easy option to change if you need it. So a quick question from Maha there. Do you click reference to get the journal? So just confirm that again. So into nominal codes, into journal entry, And then reference, I'm not touching that one. It's this option here, memorize and recall. So let's say I want to bring that template back. I find mine. Again, I can't see it for looking. There it is. I would then just click load. And then whatever was saved at the time that was memorized, it loads that. Now I can still change the reference, I can change date. Anything on that screen, I can actually change. Normal rules apply. Your journal just needs to balance, and then you can save it. Champa, you mentioned there importing journals into nominal. It doesn't allow you to adjust at a later time. It should do these days. So the latest versions, when you import journals, as long as it's on your import file, it's in the correct structure, then you should be able to edit that journal in the normal way. So clicking one journal within transactions or within your nominal activity, if you click edit, it should bring up the whole journal and you should be able to make amends. That's been in there since about, off the top of my head, I think that was about version 27 that one was introduced. But you should be able to do that these days. Right, final area I want to quickly cover with you this afternoon. And we're going to pick up a little bit more about this in tomorrow's session, where we're looking at recurring items both in the bank and the invoices. But if we pop into invoices, now this option, it's still not available in Essentials. You don't have any of the Memorize and Recall options in Essentials, but you have this option in the Standard and the Professional levels. So let me just show you that one. So if I go into Invoices and Credits, New Invoice, you can see I've got the options at the top there. Now, what this would be used for, and you might think, well, I haven't got anything where I could use that. But things like if you've got subscription invoices, if you've got quite lengthy descriptions of your services, for instance, you don't want to be keying that in each and every time. If you sell products which form part of a kit, for instance, you might think, well, I'll save that, and that will essentially generate a list of product codes for me. Now, let's say we were service-based, and I'll not pop a customer in just at this point, but I'm going to pop some details in, and we'll just say subscription. Actually, we'll put a date on that as well. I don't want to get too bogged down on the detail, but we'll pop a date in there. So we'll say this is a subscription invoice. It's for 2023 to 2024. We're going to say includes annual service. Can't type today, so let's just correct that one. Annual service. We'll say repairs, and we'll say call out charge. I'll just ignore my typing. I'll just leave it like that. And let's say £200. And let's say I want to apply VAT. So I'll just amend the item line. I'll put VAT on it. I'll just OK that. So it applies VAT. Now, rather than me type this in every time or have a separate document with that description on it, what I could do at that point is just memorize that one. Give it a reference. I'll just call it, put my initials in and a number 1 on it. And you might even put the description on there as well. So let's say annual subscription. I must switch my caps lock off. Right, and I'll leave that. Now, the frequency bit, we're going to ignore that. That's something that we're covering in the session tomorrow, where we're looking at recurring items. And what I'm going to do at that point is I'm just going to save it. Now, if I just clear that, now let's say I was raising that for, let's say 20 customers. How long is it going to take me to create that invoice 20 times? So in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to recall it. So select the template, we'll load it. It's got the details in there, and I'll just specify the customer. If I'm happy with that one, I'll save it. I'll recall it again. There it is. Load it. Choose my next customer. Now, you can't do this as a batch. You can't say, right, I want to create this invoice for these 10 customers at once. And I'm just going to, again, save that one. So it's a quick way of generating a repetitive invoice. So whether it's a big list of products that you want to include or services and you've got that big description, memorize it. And then when you're ready, you can just start reloading that one. So things like subscriptions, memberships, services that you offer. You know, if you've got things like you're always keying in like warranty or guarantee information onto your invoice, you could memorize that. So again, it's a good way to do that. Now, that memorize and recall option, it's the same for quotations. So again, you might find that useful for popping in the information and maybe including some terms on that as well. So you're memorizing the quotation, the invoice, the credit, or if you're on the professional level as well, you've got within the sales orders and purchase orders as well. Rachel, you mentioned a duplicate as well. Yeah, again, that's another option you've got available to you. So again, there's quite a few ways these days to crack the same nut. Just really depends what you're after. I think duplicates, I think with that one, you've got to have an existing invoice. So if you want to prepare an invoice in advance, then that's probably where the memorize and recall option would come in. So if you want to set up your sort of what you would sometimes refer to as a skeleton invoice, so you set up the structure, you memorize it, you don't have to allocate a customer at that point, and then, you know, so you could prepare them in advance. It can be a good time saver. But give it a go, have a try of it, see how you get on. So that covers the three key areas that I wanted to cover in this afternoon session. Just going to quickly pop back to the slides for a moment. Keep your questions coming. We're still going to try and answer as many of those as we can. What I want to do now is just obviously just quickly mention some of the other webinars that we've got booked in. So one of the one we've got booked in tomorrow morning, and it links in quite nicely with the invoices we've just been looking at, is recurring items. So once you've memorized that invoice, then setting a frequency of how often you want that to be created for maybe a specific customer. So if you regularly create monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, annual invoices for the same customer, you potentially could set that up as a recurring item. We're going to be looking at the bank side of that as well. So maybe things like direct debits, setting those up in advance and just getting them to generate themselves. So that's tomorrow morning. We're going to be covering batch reporting tomorrow afternoon. I'll be looking at that one with you all. Thursday, we're going to be looking at emailing invoices. So that's part one. Part two will be the following week, where we look at the more advanced features, but part one is this week. And then we've got the quiz on Friday, if anyone's interested in coming along to that, just to test your knowledge on some of these areas that we've been looking at this week. Loads of other sessions booked in as well: bank reconciliation, age debtors, using special product codes, sending statements and letters. So loads available. Have a good look through the timetable. They're all free to attend. So get yourself registered if you are interested. If you can't make it along, just keep an eye out for the recording being added to our recordings page. Right, as I say, keep your questions coming. We'll just hang on for the next few minutes just to try and answer as many as we can. George, you mentioned there, would it be preferable to use Memorise and Recall instead of recurring items? It very much depends on that. It depends. If it's a regular amount and it's for the same customer or supplier, or you want different dates, etc., then if you use a recurring item, it can preset the date for you. You know, if you say, right, I want this to go on the 20th day of the month, for instance, or the last day of the month, then using a recurring item can do that for you. But if you really want to make those changes where it's, you know, it's maybe not as frequent, then maybe Memorise and Recall is another option or a better option for you. A quick question there from Alihan. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right there. Can we attach an invoice to an existing sales order? You can't. So you could add information in, say, the notes area within the order, but you can't attach anything as such. Maxine, you mentioned there for the recurring items session tomorrow, is it based on professional version or is it also essentials? So the recurring items within the bank area is available to all levels of the software. So we'll be looking at entering recurring payments, so things like your direct debits, for instance. You can do recurring receipts as well. You can do journals. So if you've got those regular journals for the same amount, it can generate those for you. You can do customer receipts and supplier payments, or payments on account anyway. So we'll be looking at that. That will cover all levels of the software. We'll start with the banking area. Then if that's all you need at that point, you could always disappear from the webinar. And then we're going to be moving on to the invoicing area, which is going to be the higher levels of the software. Adele, you mentioned you're going to hopefully sounds like you're going to find a lot of uses for these Memorise and Recall options. So you found your caps lock key as well. Excellent. It's easy enough to switch off. If you need some advice, just press it again. Right, okay, just while we're trying to pick up those final few questions, I'm just going to pop on to my final slide there. And let me quickly take the opportunity to thank you for coming along. Apologies for the slight overrun. Quite a bit to get through, and I was trying to pick up some questions as we went through that. But thanks for coming along. I hope you have found it useful. If nothing else, maybe it's given you some food for thought as to maybe how you could use it going forward, and at least you'll have that awareness. You never know, it might just be something that pops into your head in the future going forward, and you think, I could use Memorise and Recall just to speed things up a little bit. Now, there will be a little survey pop up as you leave today's session, so if you could take a minute to complete that, greatly appreciated. We'll love reading those comments. Your follow-up email should be with you in probably around about an hour's time. So it'll include links so that you can register for future webinars, you can watch recordings or previous recordings if you've missed any sessions, and there'll also be a link to today's recording. So if you need a bit of a recap on anything I've covered, that'll be available as well. So Margaret, you mentioned you love Memorise and Recall, saves you a lot of time when issuing repeat invoices. Yeah, I think it's one of those where if you need to type in the same information time and time again, or the same products, but again, a bit like, imagine like if you had like a hamper of goods that you include. It's easy enough to then pull it through. You're not having to remember what products or what the description is, or having to copy and paste a lengthy description from elsewhere. So yeah, it can be a big time saver. Right, I think the questions have just about dried up there. So again, many thanks for coming along. Take care, stay safe, and if you can take a minute to complete that short survey, be really appreciated. Many thanks.